This is why AI Overviews matters for your search strategy, the Wheelhouse webinar, and I am Grace Johnson, a marketing manager here at Wheelhouse. And today we will take you through the changing search landscape, exploring AI overviews. Then we'll dive into some strategic implications for healthcare marketers, what marketers should be doing, and then we'll have a chance to dive into some Q&A. So you may notice a chat box at the bottom of your screen there that says Q&A. Feel free to drop your questions in there as we go along, and we will answer them during that section. So just to cover what we will gain today. So you'll have a greater understanding of how AI overviews are reshaping behavior and the impact for healthcare marketers. We'll look at some strategic approaches to optimizing your digital presence. And then we're going to emphasize the importance of a complete and cohesive marketing strategy here, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And before we dive into all the content, I want to give a brief introduction on Wheelhouse and who we are. So we've been delivering performance for privacy-first brands for 12 years, and here's some of the brands that we've worked with, and a few more brands outside of healthcare, but still recognizable brands that we have worked with. And we offer a handful of services here, as you can see. However, we work best when all of these services come together to approach your problems with a one Wheelhouse strategy. So that's really all of our teams kind of connecting and attacking issues from all angles here. And your hosts today are Taylor Herp. He's the Director of Digital Strategy at Wheelhouse. And Max Finch, he is the Senior Digital Strategy Analyst at Wheelhouse. They'll be taking turns guiding you through this webinar today. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Taylor to get us started.
Awesome, thank you. So Google is changing, and I think it's important when we talk about AI overviews to look back at the history of Google and how we got to where we are today. So in the earliest stages of Google, it was really just a list of blue links that would show up. Before search engines, you would have to manually input URLs, or you could go to a website that had a directory of links. But Google and other search engines really started just to help people try to find information easier that exists on the internet. So in the beginning, you could search and it would return a handful of links that it thought were relevant, so you could more easily access information. And then they started rolling out different UI features in the early 2000s. So at that point, you started seeing meta descriptions so people could understand what the pages were about a little bit more. They also started rolling out local results with maps, and even site links. So if they felt they had the website you were looking for, it gave you a few more options of which page to click into. And then from there, things started getting richer. So universal search started having images, news, videos directly in the search results. Google started transitioning from just helping you find a website or a URL that you might be looking for to really trying to surface all the information you might be trying to find, whether that's a video, an image, a news article. And then they even started adding rich snippets into the search results themselves. So things like star ratings for different services and things like that. But over time, Google made this shift from helping you find web pages to helping you find information as a whole. So then in the early 2010s, we started seeing things like knowledge panels appearing on the right-hand side of search. So if you look up a business, like if I Google Fox Chase Cancer Center, I can see directly in the search results their hours, their location, their founder, all this other information, even reviews. You don't have to go to a site anymore to see reviews for a business. You can get that information directly from the search results. We also saw featured snippets start to take over. And it was at this point where the concept of zero-click searches really started to take off. So Google wasn't sending people through to websites as often when it felt they had the answer to the question that people were searching for. So featured snippets was a predecessor to AI overviews. And that was really when Google felt like it had the answer you were looking for, it would pull that directly into the search results. And even the meta descriptions, before it would show the description that a webmaster would dictate for a page, in the mid 2010s, it would start pulling in an excerpt from the page that it felt like answered your query. So if you were simply searching when was Fox Chase founded or what is Fox Chase's address, it would pull that into the snippet, it would pull that into the meta description, and it would even pull in the knowledge graph. So more and more people that had simple queries would get their answers or their questions answered directly in the search results without having to click into a web page. And it's on that trajectory that Google's been since then. So in the late 2010s, we started seeing more visual changes to the SERPs, more rich results. They had images and video previews, expanded SERP features or expanded featured snippets. And we also saw the explosion of people also ask boxes. So not only did it have to feel like it knew the answer to your question for a featured snippet, if you asked anything, just about anything, it would list FAQs directly in the search results that you could expand and get more answers right then and there. So zero-click searches really started to take off, and Google shifted from trying to help you find web pages to trying to help you find information as quickly as possible. And that leads us to today with AI overviews. So now some of the latest features are, multi-search feature combinations where you have images, videos, organic, all, together. And then what we're getting into today, we saw search generative experiences that then transitioned to be called AI overviews. But this is just another iteration of Google giving you an answer when it feels like it has it for the query you're searching. And so when we think about the impact of AI overviews, which we'll get to throughout this conversation, if you really focus on simple answers and your content strategy is focused on, what is Raynaud's disease or what is a certain condition, and all you're doing is answering very simple questions, you're going to be more impacted than if you're focused on actually driving patient acquisition or you're trying to get new consumers for a medical device. We'll get into it, but the higher funnel your strategy is, if your goals are simply to get traffic, you're going to have a greater impact from AI overviews. If you are very low funnel, you're getting patients, you're getting customers, things like that, you might still see traffic impact from people who are learning through AI overviews, but they're also getting that information quicker and moving through the funnel even quicker. So in a way, when we think, as an SEO or as a webmaster, this might be hurting my traffic. But as a consumer, it's helping people learn quicker and get through those early learning stages quicker, which in a way is good for businesses where it, helps people learn faster and in fewer sessions they can get from, what is an insulin pump to, all right, what are the best ones? What are the differences in the features? Which one is right for me? So we'll get into it, but the impact is going to depend on what your current strategy is, what your business model is, and then there are pivots you can make to either show up more in AI overviews, get your brand more visible, or even just focus on that more qualified later funnel traffic. But this idea of Google, stealing clicks from people by showing information directly in the search isn't new to AI overviews. It's the trend they've been on for the last few decades. It's just the latest information and something that you'll have to consider as you build your strategy into the future. So on the next slide, we'll talk about user behavior changing. We talked about this a bit, but upper funnel educational searches are being dominated by AI. And even in healthcare, some of the mid and lower funnel searches also show AI overviews, which we'll get into more. But like I said, AI is helping people learn at a rapid pace. Even if it does take some of that upper funnel website traffic from your site, it's still qualifying users quicker. It's helping them get through the funnel quicker, which in the end isn't necessarily a bad thing if your brand is being mentioned, if you're still visible and in that conversation. So it might take traffic, but it doesn't necessarily reduce your customer base. And then we're also seeing a lot of people search more, I guess, longer, more conversational queries. We've seen that over time as Google's gotten better. You don't just have to search a keyword, you can search a full question, and Google's going to figure it out. But as people use AI more, as they get used to AI overviews showing up, we're also seeing our average search query length increase and get more semantic, more contextual. Um, so it is not just impacting the results, but it's impacting people's search behavior. Um, and so, yeah, we're seeing that Google now has AI mode, which it's recommending pretty heavily. So that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on over the next few years. But Google is pushing for more people to use its AI tools. You see ChatGPT and Perplexity and all of these other models trying to get more people using them when they're looking for information. So it is changing the way we search, the tools we use, not just the results themselves. And like I said, there's this competition between traditional search and AI driven search. And as younger audiences adopt it more, it's likely to shift into more AI driven search and make it more important that your brand shows up there. And Google is just continually rolling this out. So we expect to see a shift into more AI driven search. And especially as people know that Google itself is adopting more AI, we expect to see people use it more like an AI chatbot where you can actually talk to it. But so that's kind of in a nutshell what we're seeing and what got us here today. We'll get into a bit of how we see user behavior when AI overviews show up and what we're seeing in the data, and then we'll get into what you can do about it. But yeah, Grace, we can pass it off. Max is going to dig into a bit of what we're seeing user behavior wise when it comes to AI overviews.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. So we ran a user behavior study. It's a very small study, very small sample pool size, but definitely found some unique behaviors and characteristics of our users that could be explored further. One of those is that AI overviews are the primary entry point whenever they show up. We found that out of all of our users that we studied, every single one expanded the AI overview to read it in full before they even proceeded to the next step, whether that was verifying their search or moving on to the next query. They're also extremely confident in AI overviews, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on. We found that the SERP real estate is crowded and users are selective. And one of the interesting highlights that I found from that was SEOs, we used to focus on the top 10 or getting onto the first page of Google. None of our users scrolled below position 5. So it's kind of shifted more into at least getting into the top 5 than the top 10. We also found that brand recognition trumps ranking. If your brand is mentioned in an AI overview, that was a huge plus. But also in the SERP results as well. We see that your brand, whether that was Mayo Clinic or someone else, they immediately pointed that out. And then lastly, we found that the users were pretty satisfied with all the results, despite looking at multiple sources. There's a high confidence within AI overviews. Those that did verify results by clicking into links were also extremely confident and basically just verified that the AI overview they read previously gave them all the information that they needed.
Yeah, and that goes well. So we also did a really broad, comprehensive study for one of our healthcare clients that focuses on that mid to upper funnel. They produce tons of content on educational queries that can reach patients early in the journey and then guide them toward care. I looked at over 44,000 keywords that had a combined, 250 million monthly search volume. And we looked at our click-through rates for terms that had AI overviews versus those that did not. When we looked at those, out of the 44,000, just over half actually had AI overviews, which to me was surprising. I thought they would show up more often. For context, over 96% had people also ask questions, but only around half had AI overviews, and a little less than 40% of the search volume had an AI overview. But what you see here on the right is our click-through rates for queries that don't have AI overviews versus the ones that do. But so when there is no AI overview and we were ranking in position 1, our click-through rate was over 19%. And then when there was an AI overview, it was around 7.5%. And then position 2, we were around 12%. And then that dropped to around 6% when there was an AI overview. Beyond that, though, there really wasn't much of a difference. So if we were ranking positions 3 to 10, it didn't matter if there was one or there wasn't. Our click-through rates were pretty low, but pretty consistent between the two. It's really if your site has this upper funnel or mid-funnel educational content and you're ranking very highly in organic search, an AI overview is likely to significantly impact traffic. But like Max said on the last slide, when we looked at people as they engaged with these, it didn't drop our click-through rate to 0. The AI overviews, this is kind of a theme, but if there's a specific question someone needs answered and that's all they're doing, say they're having a conversation and they want to know, okay, when was this founded, or does Fox Chase do this specific type of surgery? If all they need is that one answer, it's going to take that traffic. But if that answer is part of a bigger search that they're doing, they're actively looking for care, they're evaluating which center I should go to for my cancer care, for example, they might find that answer quickly, but then move on to the next step. So when we did that study, we found that if people just had a simple question they needed answered and that's it, they didn't move on too much farther. But when they were trying to evaluate, like, okay, what else do I need to know? How do I care for someone with this disease? They would get that initial answer and then immediately move on to the next step. They'd click the sources, they'd scroll down, they'd find another result that they can dig in deeper. But I think that's the general theme is before, if you rank number 1 or number 2 for any given query, some of the people clicking in weren't necessarily the correct audience. They were just there looking for some information and were never realistically going to buy a product or schedule an appointment. What I think AI overviews do well is they satisfy that initial need, move you on to the next step, so that it kind of weeds out people who aren't as qualified. If someone's really honestly looking for care, they can get answers earlier in the search results, just like the knowledge panel has your hours and reviews, and then they move on to the next step. So what we're actually seeing with a lot of our clients is even when they saw a hit in traffic because of AI overviews, the rest of them coming in were very qualified. And so conversion rates went up, engagement went up, even though we lost some traffic because it's essentially weeding out people earlier in the journey. Or less qualified people that are so early in the journey, they're not going to take next steps. But I'll pass it back to Max to talk a bit about how important visibility is for your brand when these show up.
Yeah. So on our study, again, we found that brand recognition within the AI overview was extremely important. This, again, tends to be one of the one and only pieces of content that the readers will scan through and read. And so what we found was that in this case here, we have a mention for Stanford Healthcare. If someone's going through and looking for Huntington disease symptoms, but then later on looking for care for themselves or for a loved one, they still correlate Stanford Healthcare, and in later steps of their research funnel will recognize that brand name in the SERP results as well. And we found this carried on not just in the very top of the brand mention, but also all the way through the entire AI overview itself. If there was multiple brand mentions, both brands were remembered. And moving on to the patterns worth exploring, we found that the first pattern, overview, first behavior, users consistently engaged with the AI overviews before traditional results. We found that this behavior was observed across both mobile and desktop devices. And several users explicitly stated they start with AI overviews to get a quick snapshot. This then moved on to the recognition. Brand mentions, again, were within the AI overviews, drove subsequent clicks to those brands. We also found that users recalled brands from AI overviews when they kind of gave their feedback after the results. confidence without verification, we found that users reported a high confidence of their research, especially if it was just AI overviews. We found that across the board, people were really confident in what they learned. Despite acknowledging reliability concerns with potential flaws in an AI response, we found that people trusted it pretty well. There was one instance actually where a user performed their research. They said, I don't really trust AI overview results, so I'm going to verify them. But they only verified with one citation click. It wasn't in the citations at all. We actually found nobody clicked the citations. They scrolled down to the first SERP result, clicked it, read through it, and said, okay, I feel confident about what it's giving me. And then in the subsequent searches, that process was never used again. There was also time efficiency was a key benefit among all the responses that we got. We found that that people really valued the time saved, because not only was it right there as a 0-click result, but it also broke down and gave out further information and dissected the whole search in one go. So for example, when we did Huntington disease symptoms, it would give a breakdown of all the symptoms. It would also add on that there is no cure for Huntington's disease, but there are ways to manage it, and then some other next steps as well. And that was all really important information that the user ingested. We also found that because the United States is so diverse, those who don't speak English natively actually found it really beneficial, because it spoke to complex queries in an easy to read format. Pattern 4, we had citation blindness. Again, we found that the citations within AI overviews were largely ignored. And then mobile versus desktop, we found that mobile users specifically stuck to AIOs and AIOs only. They did use other features that they were present, like featured snippets and other interactives, where desktop users were more inclined to actually follow through with the SERP results ranked from 1 to 5.
So the implications for healthcare marketers, we touched on this a bit, but essentially it depends how impacted you are based on your current strategy. But also, even if clicks are impacted, that doesn't necessarily mean that your brand recognition has to be. So if you're playing at the top of the funnel, you're trying to reach people very early in their journey, you have educational content, and you measured that by the clicks on those articles, those are likely to be impacted. But if you're getting cited in AI overviews, even if they're not clicking the citations, if your brand is mentioned that highly, they might not click through, but they're going to remember your brand. From what we're observing with people, those impressions are becoming incredibly important. So while in the past, 7 years of doing this, I never recommended we have impressions as a KPI. But if AI overviews are showing, and if that's what's educating people, and if our brand is getting shown in front of so many people in 0-click searches, I would have that as a secondary or tertiary KPI and start showing the organization like, hey, clicks to this traffic or clicks to these pages are down, but we're becoming a valuable touch point. We're showing off our credibility and our authority on this topic, even for people who aren't clicking out of Google. You can measure how many times AI overviews are showing up in front of people that you care about, people you want to reach. You can show how many times we're being portrayed as an authority in a topic, even if we don't get that click and that doesn't hit your analytics. So when we talk about how we pivot based on AI overviews, part of it is the narrative you communicate around your organization. Part of it is also what you measure and what that means to the organization. Before, like I said, impressions were not an important metric. Clicks were important, actions taken on the site were important, and the low funnel KPIs of how many people contacted us or scheduled an appointment. But when it comes to your educational content, I would argue now that impressions, especially in AI overviews, are more important. They're becoming more important because that's how you showcase yourself as an authority. If someone's searching for the latest the latest cancer research trials in a specific, sector, then if we're showing up as the authority, if we're getting cited by AI overviews, if they're talking about the studies we're doing, those impressions are incredibly important to help build that credibility with your audience. And so even if the clicks aren't there, the impressions are there. And I would also say your content strategy as a whole, before it was, let's try to rank in these blue links, I would also say, let's try to get citations from AI overviews. They can surface, even if people aren't clicking through. If I look up cancer research trials and I see Fox Chase Cancer Center has the top citation because of an innovative new trial, that goes a long way with people who are searching that. That gets stuck in my mind of, okay, Fox Chase is doing really innovative stuff in this field. Let me go dig deeper. Maybe I'll go Google them after the fact and continue my journey. But on one hand, it's that impressions becoming more important. And then also measuring, even if it's a lower volume, the people that do come through, show how engaged they are, show how, primed they are to go engage further because they did their learning sooner. So we'll get into in the next steps of what marketers should be doing. We'll get into assessing the risk, measuring the impact, and different strategies you can take to show up more. But just know that they're going to affect you differently based on where you are in the funnel. Max, I'll let you speak to this slide.
Yeah, and so the last bit before we move on to what marketers should be doing, kind of is just like a highlight reel of what that next section is. And the core of it is that it's no longer a siloed approach, right? SEO teams are no longer, or should not be just an SEO team, or an advertising team should not be just an advertising team. We're all working cohesively as one unit to achieve essentially a brand recognition goal here. So we're looking at SEO teams working directly with advertisers and PR specialists, looking to work with other websites to get a feature or mention on their content. We're looking at strategic outreach to secure features that essentially bolster our AI overviews. Again, brand mentions and citations, as well as just an actual brand mention in the AIO itself, is extremely valuable. Looking at social media engagement to generate organic conversation, we're seeing that not only does this build kind of a community, but these are also featured in AIOs. We see Reddit, we see YouTube, we see Facebook and Instagram. They're all featured within AIOs. And then lastly, just building trust through the multiple touch points. So if you get someone on your site through a top level SERP, it's important to also kind of add in as much content and as context as you possibly can. That reinforces the trust at the top of the phase. And then if they decide to revisit your site later on, we can work on building other trust touch points as well. But simply creating your own content on your website is no longer sufficient. You really need to work on working with other teammates, building out a really comprehensive digital strategy, and pushing forward through this time.
Perfect. So what you should be doing, we touched on a lot of this already, but the first step is assessing the risk. I've spoken about this multiple times so far, but so one of the best examples when ChatGPT launched, not even AI overviews, but when ChatGPT launched, Stack Overflow was the one site that was impacted by far the most. And Stack Overflow is a repository of code that developers can go to get code that solves different issues. But then when ChatGPT coded, it really affected Stack Overflow because their site made money by selling ad space. They relied solely on traffic as their main KPI, so they could sell more ad space on their website. So if they got cited in AI overviews or their information was picked up in ChatGPT, that did them nothing. The risk was huge because stealing traffic was massive for them. If you run a blog, let's say, that's maybe the next step down where you're focused pretty solely on that upper funnel educational. Even if it's a blog for, let's say, a hospital network, you're probably going to see more of that impact. So I would focus on shifting your KPIs a little bit so it's not just traffic, it's qualified traffic. People that they get their initial answer, but then continue to take next steps. But then also even shift into, like I talked about, impressions. How many times are we getting cited as the authority in the AI overviews? But if you are lower funnel, mid funnel, like you're driving patient acquisition, that's your true KPI. That shouldn't be affected all that much because AI overviews are educating people quicker. If you see that that's, going down as AI overviews take off, then maybe you need more visibility there. Maybe a competitor or other hospitals are earning those citations and taking people off to learn more about them. So I'd say assess the risk and monitor it, which we'll get into over in the next slide. But understanding the impact is by far the most important step, because AI overviews, it's easy to see this new SERP feature and panic, essentially. But you have to know, is this really a threat, or is this just educating people earlier and giving answers just like a featured snippet did? Or is this actually going to affect my business at a meaningful level? But so let's say it is an impactful thing for your business. The first step I would do is start to measure. So you can't optimize what you can't measure. That's one of my favorite quotes when it comes to AI overviews and even things like ChatGPT and Google Gemini. There are a number of AI monitoring solutions. There are different platforms out there. We use a few of them here at Wheelhouse, but you can't optimize for AI overviews if you can't measure AI overviews. If you're not having a form or like a formal measurement strategy of, here are all the search terms we rank for, those 44,000 that we looked at for one of our clients. Here's how many show AI overviews. Here's how many cite us, cite a competitor. If you can measure that monthly, weekly, daily, even, and then you start to produce more content, you start to add schema, you start to do some outreach and get featured on other websites that are talking about the topic and getting cited, then you can see what things actually have an impact. What levers do you have to pull to show up more? So I would say definitely start monitoring AI, whether that's ChatGPT and Gemini or it's AI overviews. Coming up with a measurement solution is first before you start creating new content, before you implement schema, before you do outreach or PR. Really knowing how to measure it has to come first, so that when you do different tactics, then you can see the impact and you know where to invest more. But when it comes to that, or I guess we'll get into broadening your strategy in the next slide, but I would focus first on measuring and then diversify your marketing channels a bit too. If you're strictly focused on those 10 organic blue links, these are going to have more of an impact on you. If a huge AI overview shows up, it's taking a lot of clicks, it's bumping organic significantly down the page, I would even work with paid search teams and see maybe it's more important that you bid on this, even if you're ranking number 1 or number 2. If your click-through rates drop significantly, but it's a high-value audience you need, I would consider paid search to get some of that higher real estate on the search results. I would even look to do some social strategy. There's other places you can connect with patients. So if organic is not driving the same kind of recognition it was before, diversify and do some, social at this time. Even we see Reddit is being shown more and more in organic search. See if there's a play there that you can also get mentioned there. It's that concept of taking up the most real estate you can. But if you're ranking well organically, I would also measure and do things that are going to get you in the AI overview. I would also do things that get you talked about on forums like Reddit, or reach people in social. But diversifying your marketing mix is an important step here if your site is significantly impacted by AI overviews, but also doing these things in a measurable way so you can get cited more in those AI overviews. And so then on the next slide, so broadening your strategy, I went through this a bit already, But one of the tactics that we've seen successful for getting mentioned in AI overviews is PR and outreach. Um, so it's not fully in your control. You can't just produce a fantastic piece of content on your site and get cited in AI overviews. You can, but it's not the only avenue for that. So we see a lot of third-party sites getting brand mentions for our clients. So we have a medical device that they have tons of content on their website, but AI overviews cite a lot of third-party sites and then mention our brand from there. And we were able to find different websites that either have outdated mentions of us with older products or don't mention us at all. And we worked with our PR team to do some outreach and go help them update their page, get the latest information up so that we could get cited in AI overviews. But organic search, AI overviews are an organic search sort of play, but it's also very much a PR play. It's working with other websites and other organizations to get your brand and your products mentioned more. And then we're also seeing themes around when it comes to expertise, experience, authority, and trustworthiness. That experience piece where you're having blogs or content around the personal experiences of a person, those are showing up more and more as well. I know we have a cancer research center that has a post around a patient that lived a significantly long time with stage 4 prostate cancer. And that post was getting picked up really well, cited in AI overviews, ranking really highly organically, owning people also ask questions. Things like that are going a long way. The value of the what is prostate cancer is going away because AI overviews are giving very thorough answers that meet that initial need, and it's not leading to many clicks, but it's those firsthand stories that are also getting cited. So when people get their answer, then they're clicking in and they're taking that next step because it's a unique post. It's not kind of the sea of sameness where you're just repurposing something that tons of people have already, but you're giving them something new, something really important to them. So same thing with geo-targeted content. It's not just what is the bird flu, but here are the bird flu statistics in Portland, Oregon. So if they're looking up bird flu, but they're in Portland, they're going to see that link and click that link. But getting out of that sea of sameness, don't just do what is disease content. Make something personal, make something unique, make something locally targeted. It's going to get fewer people, but it's going to get much more qualified people to you. So that human element, that really understanding their intent behind it is very important. And then also, like we said, working with PR teams, working with your social media team, working with advertisers to have a more holistic approach. So it's not just SEO working in a silo. Those are going to be huge just for getting you the most real estate possible, getting that brand recognition that Max talked about, and really just reducing the reliance on those 10 organic blue links is really what we would recommend. So like we said, first, assess the risk, then take action if necessary, starting with an AI monitoring solution. So as you do all these different things, you can see the impact and measure it over time. Adjust your KPIs to better tell the story to your leadership. Things like here's how many impressions we're getting from AI overviews. And then broaden your strategy. Work with the other teams, get the most real estate you can, get all those mentions, and make better content that's actually going to cut through instead of the same stuff that AI overviews are repurposing. That was our webinar in a nutshell. We found this nifty AI overview here. But yeah, I guess Grace, or Max, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, but I'm ready to answer some questions.
Yes. Yeah, we are ready to open up the Q&A. So feel free to drop those questions into that Q&A box below. We did have some file in as we were going through. So we can feel free to either Taylor or Max take these questions. But first one we have is, do you have any suggestions for an AI monitoring tool?
I have two. Well, three. if you have the means, you can build your own. There are a number of tools. There's Diffy AI. There's, developers can make this yourselves using the APIs, but you can make your own where you ping an API to continually run some queries that matter. If you're looking for a pre-built solution, there's one called Profound AI that is my favorite. I think it's the most affordable and also very comprehensive. So I'd look up Profound. And then also there's one called Bluefish AI. Bluefish is incredibly comprehensive. It's a little more expensive, but Profound and Bluefish are my two favorite ones that you can buy online. But it's also not too difficult to make your own. You can even do a Google Sheet with an Excel plugin, and then every day just use your credits and rerun a query. But even if it's as simple as you have a handful of queries and you look them up yourselves, and then you jot down where we cited, where we not, that's the lowest cost, but also the, highest, most time consuming one.
I'll tack on too. We also offer this as a service backed by strategy at Wheelhouse. And while we were configuring and looking up how to do that, we were looking at AI monitoring tools. And I think when we first started this project, there was maybe two of them. One was not very well put together, but it was really cheap. And then we had Bluefish, which was really expensive, but very thorough. And I mean, I'm looking at search results right now and I'm seeing, at least 20. And it's been less than 3 months. And on top of that, too, the one that we work with specifically is constantly adding on new features almost on a weekly basis. So there's a lot of great tools out there. There's a lot of solid tools that, maybe you don't want to build out your own, but you don't want to spend a lot of money on one either. There are some tools that are going to do an okay job, a pretty good job for much less than Profound or Bluefish as well.
You can also hire a guy like Max, because in just a couple hours yesterday, he built a Chrome extension that looks at the top AI overviews for a specific page and breaks down a whole content analysis. So you're not allowed to take Max from me, but find a guy like him and he can build you a solution.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, another question here. Since we're back to impressions as a measurement, how are you guiding clients on an integrated approach to tracking the entire part of the funnel?
I'd say it all has to feed a narrative. So it starts with, it depends on your KPIs, but it's all about the narrative and how your data supports that. So a lot of organic strategy, if you are playing in that upper funnel, it's not enough to just pass up to executive leadership, we got this many clicks, or we got this many impressions. It's all about how you tell that story of why it's important. But we're guiding clients with, most of my clients have a full funnel marketing strategy where organic plays in these specific places, and these are the metrics that matter in each of those. So we do things like conversion rate optimization, whether you come here from organic or not. But even our educational content, we have different metrics of, the people are engaging here, but how many of them click through to a product page? How many click through to a services page or a scheduling page? So we're really guiding them of measuring as much as they can all along the funnel, and then using all of those data points to really tell the full story of what you're doing, why it matters. I'm not sure exactly how much of the question got answered, but it's really not, like, I'm not saying make impressions your primary KPI. Make them a KPI that helps you tell the story to your leadership. And also just know how an impression in an AI overview helps the business at the end of the day. Because it's not going to be directly tied to revenue, but getting those impressions is important. Like, people talking about your brand positively doesn't drive revenue, but that does spread awareness. It gets more people considering your brand, and that is going to, down the road, build more demand and bring more people to your website. So it's all about the narrative, in my opinion.
I'll tack on two things too. One about a client that I'm working with that's more informational, and one just in general based on the user testing study that we did. With the user testing study, we found that a lot of people with healthcare really resonated with locational or personal experiences. So I don't believe I see it all the time, like on Reddit and LinkedIn, like SEO is dead. I think it's just evolving. I think people really still crave the human connection, as well as being able to find local resources. Well, there was one query that we ran. It was, it was Huntington's disease caretaking for a significant or for a loved one. And so this user specifically looked up how to take care of a husband with Huntington's disease. And one of the top SERP results that showed up was position 5, I believe, was a more personal experience about how this woman whose husband was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, the whole process that she experienced, all the kind of like the cons and stuff, all the things you need to know, how to do things. Like there was a lot of personal experience that AI overviews isn't going to really capture. And that one was really resonated with her. We also found that when people were searching up these queries, they would sometimes tack on locational stuff. So having geo-targeted content is really important. With my informational client, they are really informational. And we found that a lot of their core pillar pages featured more informational content than a lot of next step content, right? So we know that people are summarizing a topic, an AI overview, and that's it. But then if they want to move to a next step and they land on a pillar page that is just more informational content, they turned around, or the click-through rate was just not that high. However, if we had like upcoming events, for example, the engagement rate and the bounce, like the engagement rate increased, the bounce rate dropped. And it was not something that we had seen before AI overviews. We saw a lot more interaction with this content. So.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Looks like maybe one last question here. Again, drop those questions into that Q&A box if you have any left. But do you have any other limitations or concerns around AI monitoring tools outside of high cost?
I mean, there's an asterisk to any AI monitoring, is that you can ask the same query over and over and over again and get a different response. So everyone on this call could put the same exact query into ChatGPT and get a slightly different response each time. So it's part of the story of you're monitoring and trying to get a sense of what brands are mentioned most often or what links are shown most often, but there is still that understanding that this isn't exactly what users see. So I think there's, I guess, a limitation there. You're never going to be able to see or replicate exactly what a consumer does, but you can, search 100 versions of a similar prompt 100 different times and say we showed up 0 times, and then work on your content, work on your PR, and over time maybe you're showing up 30% of the time. So it's not going to give you an exact look at what people are seeing, but it's going to directionally be accurate. So I think that's an important note. It's not like Google Search Console where you get every query that people searched and how many clicks and impressions and your average position. It's not like Google Ads where you see exactly the queries you're spending on. It's directional, but it is, directional isn't necessarily bad. It's much better than flying blind.
Perfect. All right, and we did have another one come in. How do you foresee SEO evolving with AI overviews? I think the question here is, how far do you think this will go?
I know, Max, if you want to answer, but I know we ask ourselves this internally a lot, and we've had very differing responses. Some people say in the next 6 months, everyone's going to be using AI. No one's using Google. We've had other people that think AI as a whole is a fad and it's going to blow over. I know Max and I are both much more in the middle of that. But I feel like Google is only going to any AI is only going to get better. I think more people who are slow adopters are going to use it more. AI overviews are kind of throwing that in people's faces. So even if, like my dad, not the most tech savvy guy, I know he uses Google still and he uses AI overviews as a result. So I think it might speeding up the adoption of people using ChatGPT or Claude, something like that. But I don't know that it's going to go much further than AI overviews in the Google SERP, but I could see AI mode becoming a default. Like, it's hard to say, but I don't think it's going away. I think SEO is going to have to shift into AI optimization, at least as a pillar of what you're doing. And I think too, like, websites aren't going away. People might do more learning, but like earlier learning, but then they're going to find the brands they want to look into. They're going to come to your website to dig around. So I think SEO might shift a little more into like user experience optimization and CRO. And after they've heard about your brand one way or another, are they engaging with your site well? Are they finding what they need? And then also optimizing for LLMs like ChatGPT and Gemini themselves. So you do show up if they go there. Max, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's a loaded question. I wish I could predict the future. I think that we're going to see probably legal challenges. Content owners kind of getting exhausted of their content being stolen for Google's own benefit. I mean, we've already seen advancements in AIOs, not just within the AIO itself, but now we're seeing it in people also ask as well. And I imagine we'll probably start seeing it in other spots as well. I think Google is in a unique position because they're losing market share for the first time in a long time to not just, I think even Bing, for example, but also to ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity. So they're, between that and the recent court rulings of them being a monopoly, and I have no idea. I think it's exciting. And I think it's something that's really important to stay attuned to. I follow a lot of up-to-date SEOs on LinkedIn as well as on Blue Sky, and that's what I would recommend to do as well.
Great, thank you both. All right, I think that is all of our questions for today. I do want to share our contact info here. We have our general contact info for Wheelhouse, and then as well as our emails for Taylor and Max if you would like to reach out with more questions or talk about AI reviews further. But we appreciate you joining the webinar today. We will be emailing a recording of this webinar to all of our registrants before the end of the week, so check your inbox for that. And feel free to reach out, like I said, if you have questions or want to get in touch. But we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.